My boyfriend's friend fell seriously ill. Before she passed away, she hoped to have a wedding with my boyfriend. I was strongly opposed to this idea, but my boyfriend thought I was being petty and lacking in compassion. Watching them together as they picked out wedding dresses and selected wedding rings filled me with mixed feelings. I told my boyfriend, "I wish you both a lifetime of happiness and may you have children soon." Today is Alexander Chin's birthday, and it is also the anniversary of our 7-year relationship. I specifically took a day off to spend time with him, but I found out that he went to be with Grace Sue. I sat on the couch of my rental apartment, scrolling through Grace's social media updates. She posted 2 photos today. One of them is a picture of my boyfriend Alexander in a wedding suit. Although his face isn't visible, I recognized him at a glance. Another picture shows 2 hands clasped together, with the rings on their fingers quite prominent. Beneath the photo, there's a line of text that reads, "My love will remain unwavering in this life, please take care of me from now on." In the past, I might have been extremely angry and even contemplated extreme actions. However, now I find that I am no longer upset about these things. Because of love, we care. Without love, naturally, we won't feel sad or angry. Looking at the birthday cake I prepared for Alexander on the coffee table, along with the engagement ring beside it, I couldn't help but let out a self-deprecating sigh. 7 years of youth, truly wasted. Alexander came back, smelling slightly of alcohol. He said to me, "Emily Lou, could you get me some hot water for a shower? I'm exhausted today. Also, could you wash my clothes?" Alexander didn't look at me, giving instructions as usual. In the past, even if he didn't ask, I would eagerly help him run the bath and get the laundry done quickly. But this time, I sat on the sofa and didn't move, ignoring his request. Noticing my lack of response, Alexander frowned slightly. When his gaze landed on the cake on the coffee table, his expression froze for a moment. He walked over and said gently, "Darling, I'm sorry. I didn't know you had prepared a birthday cake for me, otherwise, I would have come back earlier." The faint scent of his cologne made me feel somewhat uncomfortable. Grace loved that kind of perfume. I pushed Alexander, who was holding my hand, aside and asked expressionlessly, "Is the wedding over? I thought you would be at Grace's tonight." As soon as the words left my mouth, Alexander immediately got angry. "Emily, haven't you caused enough trouble? I already made it very clear to you that Grace is seriously ill and doesn't have much time left. We only held a fake wedding to fulfill her wish, why do you have to be so calculating about it? Grace has been my friend since childhood. If I really wanted to be with her, I would have chosen her a long time ago. I know you've never liked her, but her situation is really terrible right now. Can't you show a little more sympathy? I sympathize with her, but who sympathizes with me? Emotions are inherently selfish, no woman can accept her man being flirtatious with other women. I have always suspected that Grace's terminal illness might be fake and that she could be using this excuse to take Alexander away from me. In response to my doubts, Alexander became very angry. He insisted that Grace could never deceive him and thought I was just being overly sensitive. His trust in Grace far exceeded his trust in me. Seeing me remain silent, Alexander angrily said, "I'm tired today and don't want to argue with you. Let's talk about it tomorrow." I'll say it again, the relationship between Grace and me isn't as complicated as you think. Don't always assume that others have problems, sometimes you need to reflect on yourself. Have you noticed that you have changed a lot? After saying this, he angrily went to take a shower and then returned to the bedroom. Throughout the whole ordeal, he never noticed the engagement ring next to the cake. I spent the entire night sitting on the couch in the living room, reminiscing about the past. Alexander and I were college classmates. Our meeting was somewhat dramatic, resembling a classic hero saving the damsel in distress story, except that I was the one in need of help. At that time, my parents had just passed away in a car accident, and it was the most difficult moment of my life. In addition to being bullied at the small restaurant outside the academy, my mood was extremely bad. I wanted to leave with them, I really felt desperate. Just at that moment, Alexander appeared. He came out of the back kitchen of the restaurant, holding a kitchen knife, and boldly shouted at those who were bullying me. They were frightened by Alexander and quickly ran away. Alexander then walked over to me, helped me up from the ground, and handed me some iodine disinfectant to treat the injury on my face. "If something like this happens again, just tell me directly," he said. "My name is Alexander, just stay close to me, and I will protect you." At that moment, Alexander was very assertive. It was in that instant that he walked into my heart. To him, it was just a trivial matter. But to me, he was like a ray of light, brightening my heart. Since then, I frequently visited his family's restaurant to eat, and we gradually became familiar with each other. In the second half of my first year in college, I mustered up the courage to confess my feelings to him. He looked at me in surprise, his face full of disbelief. I felt my face flush and angrily said, "Come on, just give me an answer." Alexander shot me an annoyed glance and replied, "Who confesses like that? I just woke up, and I haven't even brushed my teeth yet." I quickly responded, "Wait, hold on, didn't I agree to it?" Since I got together with Alexander, I have considered him my one and only. I had always thought that we would walk from school uniforms to wedding dresses, dreaming of a happy life after marriage. However, everything changed completely after we graduated from university when Grace entered the picture. Grace is Alexander's first love, and he often refers to her as his good friend, someone with whom he can share everything. I began to doubt whether a genuine and pure friendship could truly exist between men and women. The first time I met Grace, I felt a strong aversion to her. Her interaction with Alexander felt inappropriate, they were intimate right in front of me, completely disregarding my feelings. It seemed like Alexander didn't notice Grace's deliberately provocative gaze towards me. He kept insisting that they were childhood friends and urged me not to be jealous or petty. Because I love him, I chose to endure it all. However, Alexander started to think that I couldn't do without him and became increasingly indifferent to me. The sincere effort I've put in has only resulted in repeated disappointment. I gradually feel exhausted. It seems that Alexander is unaware of the crisis in our relationship. Whenever Grace calls him, he is always quick to go to her. "Alexander, I'm running a fever. Can you drive me to the hospital?" "Alexander, my gastroenteritis has flared up again, I feel really awful." Every time Grace called, no matter how late it was, Alexander would head over immediately. I had argued with Alexander about this before, but I always ended up apologizing. Faced with Grace's provocative gaze, I felt a deep anger and a sense of injustice. They seemed like a couple, while I felt like an outsider. In the morning, I got up from the sofa and stretched. Looking at the morning light outside, I took a deep breath. The light that once illuminated the depths of my heart has now faded away. It's time for me to move forward. In the past, I felt somewhat too humble inside. This time, I have decided not to look back and will no longer settle for less. I threw the cake and the engagement ring from the coffee table into the trash can and glanced at the closed bedroom door. I knew that Alexander must be awake by now. He was waiting for me to apologize first, just like I had done before. Every time we argued about Grace, it always ended with me backing down first, but this time, I didn't want to do that again. He thought I would act the same way as I had in the past. Those who are favored tend to be bold and reckless, while those who are not always have turmoil in their hearts. Matters of love cannot blossom and bear fruit relying solely on one party's efforts. When I walked out of the community, I happened to run into Grace. She had come early in the morning, holding a bag in her hand. When she saw me, a dismissive smile appeared on her face. "Emily, why are you up so early? Has Alexander gotten up? He left something behind yesterday, and I brought it over. To be honest, it's a pity you didn't come to our wedding." Her words were clearly meant to provoke me. She just wanted to see me angry and powerless. As long as I had a conflict with her, Alexander would always stand by her side. This time, I was no longer as angry as before. I walked up to her with a blank expression, and before she could react, I landed a punch right on her face. Grace stumbled back a few steps, her eyes wide open in disbelief as she looked at me. I shook my fist, cast her a cold glance, and then left without another word. She was angrily shouting at me from behind, but I ignored her. She would definitely tell Alexander, and he would scold me just like he did before, but I didn't care anymore. Once I got to the company, I went straight to the general manager to request a transfer. The general manager was a bit surprised and smiled as he said, I reached out to you a few times before, hoping to send you for further training and transfer you to the headquarters, but you never agreed. What made you come to me this time? I sighed and replied, I was young back then, but now I've come to understand things. The general manager noticed that I seemed a bit down and asked if I had a fight with my boyfriend. Didn't you say you were going to propose to him soon? I shook my head and told him that from now on, I would have to get used to living alone. Upon hearing this, the general manager didn't say much, he just quickly helped me prepare a report and arranged for an external training program. I finished handing over my work and didn't leave the office until the afternoon after a busy day. I didn't go back to the rental apartment, instead, I went to a nearby barbecue stand. Smoking, drinking, and enjoying barbecue felt great. Alexander said he didn't like the smell of smoke on me, so I quit smoking. He also mentioned that barbecue wasn't very hygienic, so after being with him, I even gave up barbecue. Now, I've rediscovered those things I once set aside. A person, carefree and at ease, feels great. As night falls, in the food stall, someone has had too much to drink, singing hoarsely and eliciting cheers from the crowd. That song reminds me of someone I once loved deeply, a love that brought both joy and pain. As I listened to the music, I shed tears while drinking a bottle of beer, doing it all for that once naive self. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, I staggered back to my rented apartment. Throughout the day, Alexander had called me numerous times, but I hadn't answered any of them. When I got back to the apartment, I saw Alexander and Grace sitting on the sofa in the living room. Alexander raised an eyebrow and coldly said, So you finally decided to come back? What time do you think it is? I called you all day, didn't your phone ring? Why didn't you answer the calls? Grace came over early this morning to deliver something, and you actually hit her. Emily, are you out of your mind? Faced with Alexander's accusations and Grace's smug demeanor, I felt a surge of anger inside me. It's simply too lenient to just hit her. I burped and coldly said, if killing weren't a crime, I would have taken care of her a long time ago. Alexander was taken aback for a moment after hearing this, then angrily said, Emily, you've gone too far. Just look at how you are right now, hurry and apologize to Grace. At that moment, Grace pretended to mediate, pulling on Alexander and saying, Don't be angry, Emily might just be having a bad day. After all, we held a fake wedding yesterday, so it's understandable that she feels bad. I'm fine, after all, she hasn't treated me very well. Emily, I'm not targeting you, but do you know how much Alexander worries about you? If you're going out for drinks, at least you should let Alexander know. On the surface, she seems to be offering advice, but it actually feels more like she's trying to stir up trouble between me and Alexander. Alexander coldly said to me, I've told you many times that my wedding with Grace is a sham. Grace is terminally ill and doesn't have much time left. How can you lack any compassion? I couldn't help but interrupt him, fueled by the effects of the alcohol, and said, She's terminally ill, so you'll agree to whatever she says? If she wanted to be with you, would you agree without hesitation? Hearing this, Alexander became even angrier and slapped me hard. Emily, how can you say that? Alexander glared at me, his eyes red. What do you take me for? I've told you many times that if I really wanted to pursue a relationship with Grace, it wouldn't involve you. If you don't apologize to both Grace and me, we're breaking up. As Grace comforted Alexander, she pretended to be displeased and said to me, Emily, you are really going too far. You've been with Alexander for so many years. How can you have no trust in him at all? You can hit me, but you shouldn't belittle Alexander like this. After drinking quite a bit tonight, I felt a bit irritated and didn't want to prolong the argument. I looked at Alexander and asked, Are we breaking up if you don't apologize? He mistakenly thought that I would back down, just like before. Alexander said that not only did he need to apologize, but he also had to kneel on a washboard and promise not to anger me or get jealous again. I laughed and then said, Let's break up. As soon as I spoke, Alexander was taken aback. What did you say? He asked. I didn't say anything more. I went straight to the bedroom, took out my suitcase, and began packing my clothes. Alexander seemed a bit anxious and was about to say something when Grace gently interjected, "Emily, don't lose your temper. Is using this method to get Alexander to forgive you a bit immature? It's clearly your mistake, and you still want Alexander to apologize first?" As she spoke, the urgency on Alexander's face immediately vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. It was clear that Grace's words had influenced him, making him think that I was merely trying to take a step back to move forward. I couldn't be bothered to deal with them. After packing up my things, I picked up my suitcase and walked towards the door. Alexander angrily said, "Emily, if you walk out that door today, don't come back." I gave him a long glance and sighed inwardly. Grace quickly added, "Emily, just apologize to Alexander and don't make him angry again. I won't bring up the fact that you hit me today." Before she could finish, I couldn't help but kick her out. Grace let out a low groan, curling up on the ground while clutching her abdomen, her face reflecting her pain. I hadn't kicked her too hard, considering I had a bit too much to drink tonight. Grace cried out in pain, but most of it was for show. Alexander swiftly rushed to her side, glaring at me with anger. "Emily, you..." Before he could finish his sentence, I turned and walked away without looking back, saying directly, "Alexander, let's break up. I'm not your pet, I can't spend all my time trying to please you. Wishing you happiness and a swift start to your family life. May we never meet again for the rest of our lives." I found a hotel to stay in and blocked Alexander's contact information. From now on, I hope he will no longer be part of my life, and I don't want to see any news about Grace either. Their life from now on has nothing to do with me. I have a lot of pain in my heart that I need to heal on my own in the days to come. Time flies, and 3 days have passed just like that. I completed the formalities at the company and booked a flight for the afternoon to go to another city. I may not come back again. This city holds too many memories and emotions from my youth. In the days to come, I will slowly reflect on these moments. As I walked out of the company gate, I discovered that Alexander was waiting downstairs. He looked noticeably haggard after 3 days of no contact. Pretending not to see him, I walked to the side of the road to hail a taxi to the airport. However, Alexander quickly approached, seeming to want to say something, but then hesitated. We stood quietly by the roadside without saying a word. Until a taxi pulled up in front of me, and just as I opened the door to get in, he hurriedly grabbed the door. "Emily, are you really going to break up with me?" That night, I spoke impulsively, "Please don't be angry, okay? I didn't consider your feelings before, but I promise I won't treat you like that again. Please don't go, okay?" Seeing the helpless expression on Alexander's face, I sighed. It was clear that we could never be together again. My feelings for him had faded, and I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Just as I was about to speak, Alexander's phone rang. It was a call from Grace, I heard it very clearly. On the other end of the line, Grace's voice was rushed and sounded weak. She said, "Alexander, I'm feeling really unwell right now and struggling to breathe. Can you please take me to the hospital quickly?" Alexander looked a bit troubled and hesitated as he glanced at me. I closed the car door and replied calmly, "Go take care of her." He quickly responded, "I'll take her to the hospital first and we can talk later. I said that I would wait for you downstairs at your company, and no matter what, I wouldn't leave." After saying this, he hurried off to find Grace. I shook my head and told the taxi driver, "To the airport." After leaving that city, I got a new SIM card and started a new life. I devoted myself to studying seriously and successfully transferred to the company headquarters. 6 months later, due to my outstanding business skills, I quickly received a promotion and a raise. I have a good appearance and a gentle demeanor, which led several older female colleagues at the head office to frequently arrange blind dates for me. However, I am not currently interested in that. My previous relationship left me with significant wounds, and I am uncertain if I still have the courage to open my heart again. Ms. Lee from the finance department is particularly supportive of me, as she has been insisting that her nephew would be a great match for me. I have seen pictures of her nephew, and he is indeed quite handsome. Emily, the best way to get over a past relationship is to start a new one. Why don't you meet my nephew first? If things go well, you can try dating, if not, you can just be friends. My nephew has seen your photo and is very pleased with it. I've brought him here today, and he's at the cafe right next to our office. Ms. Lee warmly invited me, and I couldn't refuse, so I had to smile wryly and go to the coffee shop downstairs. In the coffee shop, I spotted a handsome guy sitting by the window. He was Ms. Lee's nephew, Henry Lee. He looked much like his photos, attractive and charming. However, upon seeing him in person, I felt as if I had met him somewhere before. Before I could say anything, Henry smiled and said, "Emily, long time no see." I was taken aback for a moment and asked, "Do you know me?" Henry responded with a smile, "I'm a bit surprised to hear that. We had dinner together a few years ago." "It's only been a few years, and you've forgotten about me?" "Oh right, back then you were completely focused on Alexander and didn't pay attention to how the rest of our dorm was doing." Hearing him say this, my expression suddenly became a bit odd. Memories surged like a tide. As I looked at Henry's face, he seemed somewhat similar to someone from my past. I widened my eyes in surprise and exclaimed, "You're Alexander's roommate, the chubby one, Michael Lee, right? It's been years since we last met, you've changed so much. Did you change your name?" Henry smiled and replied, "Well, you know how it is, men change a lot as they grow older. My old name sounded a bit old-fashioned, so I changed it after graduating from college. Now it seems like you've become a completely different person, right?" I nodded inside, saying, "Indeed, you've changed so much. If you hadn't reminded me, I really wouldn't have recognized you." Henry winked at me and asked, "I heard you broke up with Alexander. Does that mean I have a chance?" I replied with a wry smile, "Are you here to laugh at my misfortune?" Henry shook his head and said, "I'm serious about this. I liked you back in college, but back then, your eyes were only on Alexander. After I found out you and Alexander broke up, I wanted to reach out to you, but I never heard from you. Later, my aunt told me that a beautiful girl joined her company and even showed me your photo. You have no idea how excited I was. If you truly broke up with Alexander, can we give it a try?" I looked at him with some helplessness, unsure of how to respond. Henry smiled mysteriously and said, "Of course, if you get back together with Alexander, just pretend I never said that. A few days ago, I got a bit overexcited and accidentally posted your photo in my moments, and as a result, Alexander saw it. He came to me in tears, asking me to help him find you. Alright, he's here, you two can chat first." In the end, I said sincerely, "If you really don't plan to get back together, don't forget to give me a chance." When Alexander walked into the cafe, I had already thought a lot about it. I didn't expect to run into him here. After Henry called out to Alexander, he directly left the cafe. Alexander walked up to me, his expression complicated. He asked softly, "Have you been doing well lately?" He had lost a lot of weight. I smiled in response, feeling quite comfortable on my own. He sat across from me, remained silent for a moment, and then said, "Are you still angry with me?" I shook my head and replied, "It's all in the past now, there's nothing to be angry about. I was too young in the past, and now that I think about it, many things didn't need to make me so angry. Life isn't easy as it is, so there's no need to add more trouble for myself. How have you been lately? It's been half a year since we last saw each other, and I've already let go of everything." His appearance surprised me a bit, but it didn't stir any emotions in my heart. Alexander looked at me as if he expected me to feel happy about our reunion, but instead he was disappointed. To me, he felt like a stranger now. With a melancholy expression, he said, "I haven't been well. I've been looking for you for a long time, but there's been no news of you." I smiled faintly but didn't respond. He continued, "Grace lied to me, she doesn't have a terminal illness. Everything she did before was to ruin my relationship with you. He only understands now, but unfortunately, it's too late." I had told him before that Grace's terminal illness might be fake, but he didn't believe me. He regrets it now, but it doesn't matter anymore. He said, even though she deceived me, she still ended up dying. I nearly choked on my coffee, and in shock, I asked, "How did she die?" Alexander chuckled bitterly and told me that on the day you left, she deceived me, claiming she was unwell and asking me to take her to the hospital. As a result, on the way there, a dump truck lost control and crashed into our car. I sustained some minor injuries, but she lost too much blood and unfortunately could not be saved. Is this considered retribution? I couldn't help but let out a sigh. We didn't talk much about Grace. Instead, Alexander brought up topics we used to be interested in and reminisced about our past experiences. I was also reminded of those wonderful moments, and it stirred up many sentiments within me. No matter how beautiful the memories are, there will always come a time for them to end. The most beautiful things are often in the past, but who can remain in the past for a lifetime? The train of life is always moving forward, and no matter how beautiful the scenery along the way may be, it can only be briefly appreciated. Alexander's eyes sparkled with a light, and his voice trembled slightly as he asked me, "Can we go back to the way things were?" I did not answer. He seemed to dim a little and then asked, "Even if we can't go back, at least we can still be friends, right? Can two people who once loved each other really be friends after parting ways? It's almost impossible. Because once you've loved each other, when you part ways, you can only become the most familiar strangers. This is the greatest respect for each other." Alexander's eyes were red, and he said sadly, "Emily, I really regret it. I just hope you can give me another chance, I swear." Before he could finish his sentence, I interrupted him and said softly, "Maybe I still love you, or maybe you still love me too. But no matter what, the past is the past, and there's no possibility of turning back. We have both wasted our time, and that is a youth that can never be erased in life. I just hope that in this life, we won't intersect again, and that we will never meet again, no matter how far apart we are. Alexander, forget me." After I said this, Alexander shed tears. He lay on the table, crying uncontrollably, while the other customers in the cafe curiously looked our way. Instead of comforting Alexander, I got up and left the cafe. Outside, Henry was still waiting instead of leaving. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw Alexander crying and turned to me, saying with a pout, "That woman is really something." I gave him a helpless glare and then turned to walk away. Henry hurried to catch up, smiling as he said, "It's better to be straightforward. I certainly don't want my girlfriend to have another man in her heart." I helplessly replied that he was the one I hadn't agreed to be with. Henry said, "You can't escape this, just accept your fate." I turned back to glance at the cafe. The sunlight pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows was blinding, and I could no longer see Alexander inside, regretting and crying. The world is vast, and we are merely passengers under the same sun, destined never to meet again. A single goodbye symbolizes two separate worlds. So be it.